The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Kensington Palace as guard Thomas Mitchell took his position at the main entrance. At 28 years old, Thomas had served the royal family for 3 years with an impeccable record. His uniform was pressed to perfection, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his posture straight as an arrow. Princess Charlotte, now 10 years old, had developed a routine of greeting the palace staff during her morning walks with her governess. Unlike many children her age, Charlotte possessed an unusual awareness of the people around her and genuinely cared about their well-being. She had noticed Thomas looked particularly tired this morning, his usually bright eyes showing signs of exhaustion. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," Charlotte said cheerfully as she approached the entrance with her governess, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell trailing behind. Thomas smiled warmly, his fatigue momentarily forgotten. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness. Beautiful day for a walk, isn't it?" Charlotte nodded enthusiastically. "Are you feeling all right? You look very tired today." The genuine concern in the young princess's voice touched Thomas deeply. Few people, especially of royal blood, noticed such details about the staff. "I'm quite well, thank you for asking, Your Highness. Just had a long night with my newborn daughter. She's not quite figured out the difference between day and night yet." Charlotte's eyes lit up with excitement. "You have a baby? What's her name? How old is she?" Thomas's face beamed with pride as he spoke about his daughter. "Her name is Emma, Your Highness. She's just 6 weeks old. My wife says she has my stubborn streak already." Mrs. Hartwell cleared her throat impatiently. "Princess Charlotte, we really must continue with our schedule. Your mother is expecting you for your French lesson in 30 minutes. But Charlotte was completely absorbed in the conversation. She had always been fascinated by babies and family life outside the palace walls. "Does she cry a lot? My baby brother Louis used to cry all night when he was little." "Mama said it was perfectly normal." Thomas chuckled softly. "She does indeed, Your Highness. Sometimes I think she's practicing to be an opera singer." The princess giggled at this, her laughter ringing through the courtyard like silver bells. Mrs. Hartwell's expression grew increasingly stern as she watched the interaction. She had always believed that royalty should maintain proper distance from the staff, and this casual conversation was making her uncomfortable. "Princess Charlotte," Mrs. Hartwell said more firmly, "we really must go now." Charlotte turned to her governess with a slight frown. "Just a few more minutes, please. I want to hear more about baby Emma." Mrs. Hartwell's lips pressed into a thin line. She had served various royal households for 15 years and prided herself on maintaining strict protocol. In her view, this familiarity between the princess and a guard was highly inappropriate and needed to be reported to the senior staff immediately. "Your Highness, it's not appropriate to keep the guard from his duties with such lengthy conversations," Mrs. Hartwell said, her voice carrying a warning tone that both Charlotte and Thomas understood clearly. Thomas straightened immediately, recognizing the subtle reprimand. "Mrs. Hartwell is quite right, Your Highness. I should focus on my duties." Charlotte looked between her governess and Thomas, sensing the tension that had suddenly filled the air. She didn't understand why such a lovely conversation about a new baby should be considered inappropriate, but she could see that Mrs. Hartwell was genuinely displeased. "I'm sorry if I kept you from your work, Mr. Mitchell," Charlotte said politely, though her voice carried a note of confusion. "Not at all, Your Highness. It was my pleasure to speak with you," Thomas replied formally, though his eyes conveyed gratitude for her kindness. As they walked away, Charlotte kept glancing back at Thomas, her mind working through what had just happened. She had grown up surrounded by rules and protocols, but she had never understood why kindness and genuine interest in people should be restricted by such formalities. Mrs. Hartwell walked briskly beside her, already composing in her mind the report she would deliver to the Queen's private secretary. In her opinion, Guard Mitchell had overstepped boundaries by engaging in such personal conversation with the princess, and appropriate action needed to be taken to prevent future incidents. The morning air suddenly felt cooler as they approached the palace doors, and Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that her innocent conversation had somehow caused trouble for the kind guard who had shared his joy about his new daughter. She looked back one more time to see Thomas standing at attention, his expression now serious and professional, all traces of the proud father momentarily hidden behind his duty. Unknown to Charlotte, this simple morning conversation would set in motion a series of events that would test her growing sense of justice and loyalty to those who served her family with dedication and kindness. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell wasted no time in seeking out Sir Geoffrey Pemberton, the Queen's private secretary, immediately after Charlotte's French lesson. She found him in his oak-paneled office, surrounded by neat stacks of correspondence and official documents that required the Queen's attention. Sir Geoffrey, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed spectacles, looked up from his papers as Mrs. Hartwell knocked on his door. He had worked for the royal household for over 20 years and was known for his meticulous attention to protocol and his unwavering loyalty to the crown. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "What brings you here this afternoon?" Mrs. Hartwell sat down, her posture rigid with disapproval. "Sir Geoffrey, I'm afraid I must report an incident this morning that concerns Princess Charlotte's interactions with the palace staff." Sir Geoffrey set down his pen and gave her his full attention. Any matter involving the young princess required immediate consideration, especially if it involved potential breaches of protocol. "Please tell me what happened," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. Mrs. Hartwell recounted the morning's events with precise detail, emphasizing what she perceived as inappropriate familiarity between Thomas and Princess Charlotte. She described how the guard had shared personal information about his family life, and how the princess had shown excessive interest in his private affairs. The conversation lasted nearly 10 minutes. "Sir Geoffrey," she continued, her voice growing more stern, "the guard made no attempt to redirect the princess or maintain appropriate boundaries. He spoke about his wife and newborn daughter as if he were chatting with a neighbor, rather than addressing a member of the royal family." Sir Geoffrey listened intently, his expression growing increasingly serious. While he appreciated the princess's natural kindness and curiosity about people, he understood Mrs. Hartwell's concerns about maintaining proper protocol. "Did Guard Mitchell initiate this personal conversation?" Sir Geoffrey asked. "Well, no," Mrs. Hartwell admitted reluctantly. "Princess Charlotte asked about his well-being, and he responded by sharing details about his personal life. But he should have politely deflected such questions and maintained professional distance." Sir Geoffrey nodded thoughtfully. In his experience, maintaining the delicate balance between security, protocol, and the natural development of young royals was one of the most challenging aspects of palace life. However, he also understood that any perceived breach of protocol, however innocent, needed to be addressed decisively. "I see your point, Mrs. Hartwell," he said finally. "While Guard Mitchell's intentions were undoubtedly innocent, you're correct that palace staff must maintain appropriate boundaries with members of the royal family, regardless of age." Mrs. Hartwell felt vindicated by his response. "I'm also concerned about the precedent this sets, Sir Geoffrey. If word spreads among the staff that such casual conversations are acceptable, it could lead to more serious breaches of protocol." Sir Geoffrey considered this carefully. The palace employed hundreds of staff members, from guards and housekeepers to gardeners and kitchen workers. Maintaining consistent standards across all departments was essential for both security and proper functioning of the royal household. "You've done the right thing by bringing this to my attention," Sir Geoffrey said, reaching for his telephone. "I'll need to discuss this matter with Captain Morrison, the head of palace security, and determine the appropriate course of action." Mrs. Hartwell stood to leave, satisfied that her concerns were being taken seriously. "Thank you, Sir Geoffrey. I know Princess Charlotte meant no harm, but it's important that all staff understand their proper place." After Mrs. Hartwell left, Sir Geoffrey sat quietly for several minutes considering the situation. He had observed Princess Charlotte's interactions with staff members before, and had always been impressed by her natural warmth and genuine interest in people. These qualities would serve her well in her future royal duties, but they also needed to be balanced with appropriate boundaries and security considerations. He picked up his phone and dialed Captain Morrison's extension. "Captain, I need to speak with you about Guard Mitchell. There's been a protocol issue that requires immediate attention." Within an hour, Captain Morrison arrived at Sir Geoffrey's office. A former military officer with 30 years of service, Captain Morrison took security and protocol violations very seriously. After hearing the details of the morning's incident, his expression grew stern. "I'll speak with Mitchell immediately," Captain Morrison said. "This kind of familiarity cannot be tolerated regardless of his intentions or service record." Sir Geoffrey nodded in agreement. "I'll also need to brief the Queen's senior staff about this incident." We may need to review our guidelines for staff interactions with the younger royals. As the two men discussed the appropriate disciplinary measures, neither of them anticipated how strongly Princess Charlotte would react when she learned about the consequences of her innocent morning conversation. The wheels of palace protocol had been set in motion, and guard Thomas Mitchell's future at Kensington Palace now hung in the balance. That evening, as Charlotte played with her younger brother Prince Louis in the nursery, she couldn't stop thinking about her conversation with Mr. Mitchell and the way Mrs. Hartwell had seemed so upset about it. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't quite understand what it was. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching the somber mood that had settled over the palace security office. Thomas Mitchell stood at attention in Captain Morrison's office, his heart pounding as he waited to learn why he had been summoned so urgently. Captain Morrison sat behind his desk, reviewing Thomas's personnel file one final time before delivering the news that would change everything. The file showed an exemplary record, 3 years of faithful service, numerous commendations from senior staff, and not a single disciplinary action. Guard Mitchell, Captain Morrison began, his voice carrying the weight of military authority. I'm afraid we need to discuss yesterday's incident involving Princess Charlotte. Thomas felt his stomach drop. He had replayed the morning conversation dozens of times, wondering if he had somehow crossed a line he didn't know existed. Sir, if I may ask, what specific incident are you referring to? Thomas asked, though he suspected he already knew. Captain Morrison leaned forward, his expression stern. You engaged in an extended personal conversation with Her Royal Highness Princess Charlotte, sharing intimate details about your family life and failing to maintain appropriate professional boundaries. Thomas's mind raced as he tried to understand how a simple conversation about his daughter could be construed as a serious violation. Sir, the princess asked about my well-being. I simply answered her questions politely. I had no intention of overstepping any boundaries. Your intentions are not in question, Mitchell, Captain Morrison replied curtly. However, palace protocol exists for important reasons. Members of the royal family, regardless of age, must be treated with proper formality and respect. Personal conversations of the nature you engaged in are strictly forbidden. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. 3 years of dedicated service, countless early morning shifts, missed family dinners, and nights away from his wife and newborn daughter suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of one innocent conversation. What does this mean for my position, sir? Thomas asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. Captain Morrison's expression softened slightly. He genuinely regretted having to discipline such a dedicated guard, but protocol was protocol. I'm afraid I have no choice but to recommend your immediate reassignment away from direct contact with the royal family. The Queen's staff has requested that you be transferred to external perimeter duty, effective immediately. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. External perimeter duty meant patrolling the outer grounds of the palace, with no possibility of interaction with the royal family he had grown to respect and serve. It was essentially a demotion disguised as a lateral transfer. Sir, I have a new baby at home, Thomas said, his voice barely concealing his desperation. The position you're describing pays significantly less than my current role. My family depends on this income. Captain Morrison's jaw tightened. He had 3 children of his own and understood the financial pressure Thomas was facing, but his hands were tied by the demands of senior palace staff. I'm sorry, Mitchell. The decision has been made at the highest levels. You'll report to Sergeant Williams for your new assignment on Monday morning. Meanwhile, Princess Charlotte was experiencing her own morning of confusion and growing concern. During breakfast with her mother, the Duchess of Cambridge, she had asked casually about Guard Mitchell, wondering if he would be at his usual post when she took her morning walk. Why do you ask about the guard, sweetheart? Her mother inquired, looking up from her morning correspondence. Charlotte stirred her porridge thoughtfully. He told me about his new baby yesterday. Her name is Emma and she keeps him awake at night. I wanted to ask how she's doing today. The Duchess smiled at her daughter's compassion, but also recognized the potential complications of such personal connections with staff members. That's very kind of you to be concerned, Charlotte. But we must remember that the palace staff have important work to do. Charlotte nodded, but something in her mother's tone suggested there was more to the story. She had learned to read the subtle signs that adults often displayed when they were keeping information from her. Later that morning, as Charlotte walked with Mrs. Hartwell toward the courtyard, She noticed immediately that Thomas was not at his usual post. Instead, an older guard she didn't recognize stood at attention by the main entrance. "Where is Mr. Mitchell?" Charlotte asked Mrs. Hartwell directly. Mrs. Hartwell's expression remained carefully neutral. "I believe he's been assigned to different duties today, Your Highness." Charlotte stopped walking and turned to face her governess. Despite her young age, she possessed an intuitive understanding of human nature that often surprised adults. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said quietly, "did you report our conversation yesterday to someone?" Mrs. Hartwell's cheeks flushed slightly, confirming Charlotte's suspicion. "I simply informed the appropriate people about the interaction, as is my duty, Your Highness." Charlotte felt a surge of emotion she had never experienced before. It was a mixture of anger, disappointment, and protective instinct that surprised her with its intensity. "You got him in trouble for talking to me about his baby?" Charlotte asked, her voice rising slightly. "Your Highness, please understand that palace protocol exists for important reasons," Mrs. Hartwell began, but Charlotte interrupted her. "He didn't do anything wrong. I asked him questions and he was just being kind." Charlotte's voice carried a note of authority that belied her 10 years. Mrs. Hartwell looked around nervously, hoping no other staff members were witnessing this unprecedented display of royal displeasure directed at her. "We should discuss this privately, Your Highness," she said, attempting to guide Charlotte toward the palace entrance. But Charlotte stood firmly in place, her young mind working rapidly to understand the full implications of what had happened. A kind man who had shared his joy about his new daughter was being punished because of her questions, and Mrs. Hartwell's rigid interpretation of protocol. For the first time in her young life, Princess Charlotte faced a moral crisis that would define her character and her future relationship with the institution she was born to represent. Princess Charlotte spent the remainder of that morning in a state of quiet determination that would have impressed even the most seasoned diplomats. Rather than accepting Mrs. Hartwell's explanation or retreating to the safety of childhood ignorance, she decided to uncover the full truth about what had happened to Guard Mitchell. During her afternoon piano lesson, Charlotte found herself unable to concentrate on the musical scales. Her teacher, Mrs. Victoria Ashford, noticed the princess's distraction and gently inquired about her mood. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ashford," Charlotte said, lifting her hands from the keys. "I'm worried about someone and I can't stop thinking about whether they're all right." Mrs. Ashford, a kind woman in her 50s who had taught several generations of royal children, recognized the genuine concern in Charlotte's voice. "Would you like to talk about it, Your Highness? Sometimes sharing our worries can help us think more clearly." Charlotte considered this carefully. Unlike Mrs. Hartwell, Mrs. Ashford had always encouraged open conversation and had never seemed concerned about protocol when it came to discussing feelings and concerns. "Mrs. Ashford, do you think it's wrong to care about the people who work here, to ask about their families and want to know if they're happy?" Mrs. Ashford paused, recognizing that this was not a simple question about etiquette but something much deeper. "I think caring about others is one of the most important qualities a person can have, especially someone in your position." "Why do you ask?" Charlotte explained the situation with Guard Mitchell, her voice growing more passionate as she described how unfair the entire situation seemed. Mrs. Ashford listened carefully, understanding that the young princess was grappling with fundamental questions about justice, authority, and human dignity. "It sounds like you believe Guard Mitchell was treated unfairly," Mrs. Ashford observed. "I know he was," Charlotte replied with conviction. "He was just being nice to me and now he's in trouble because Mrs. Hartwell thinks palace workers shouldn't talk about their families." Mrs. Ashford chose her words carefully. "What do you think you should do about this situation?" Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, her young mind working through possibilities. "I think I need to understand exactly what happened and who made the decision to punish him." That evening, Charlotte took an unprecedented step. She asked to speak privately with her father, Prince William, in his study. This was unusual because Charlotte typically shared her concerns with her mother, but she sensed that this situation required a different approach. Prince William looked up from his desk as Charlotte entered, immediately noticing the serious expression on his daughter's face. "Hello, sweetheart. What brings you to see me this evening?" Charlotte sat in the large leather chair across from her father's desk, looking surprisingly mature for her 10 years. "Papa, I need to ask you about something important and I need you to tell me the truth." Prince William set aside his papers and gave Charlotte his full attention. He had learned to take his daughter's concerns seriously, as she rarely approached him with trivial matters. "Of course, Charlotte. What's troubling you?" Charlotte recounted the entire story, from her conversation with Guard Mitchell to her realization that Mrs. Hartwell had reported the incident. She spoke with clarity and conviction, making her case like a young barrister presenting evidence. "Papa, I don't understand why kindness is being punished," she concluded. "Mr. Mitchell has worked here for 3 years. He protects our family every day. Why should he lose his job because I asked about his baby?" Prince William felt a surge of pride in his daughter's moral clarity, even as he recognized the complexity of the situation. He had not been informed about the incident with Guard Mitchell, and Charlotte's account suggested that the punishment might indeed be disproportionate to the offense. "Charlotte, let me make some inquiries about this situation," he said carefully. "Can you give me Guard Mitchell's full name and tell me exactly when this conversation took place?" Charlotte provided all the details she could remember, her hope growing as she saw her father taking notes and treating her concerns with respect. "In the meantime," Prince William continued, "I want you to understand that palace protocol exists for important reasons, including security and maintaining proper boundaries. However, you're right that kindness and basic human dignity should never be discouraged." The next morning, Prince William placed a call to Sir Geoffrey Pemberton, requesting a full briefing on the Guard Mitchell situation. Sir Geoffrey was surprised by the prince's inquiry, as such personnel matters rarely came to his attention. "Your Royal Highness, I can certainly provide you with the details," Sir Geoffrey said, though he wondered how Prince William had learned about such a minor disciplinary action. After hearing the full account, including Mrs. Hartwell's report and Captain Morrison's disciplinary decision, Prince William found himself agreeing with his daughter's assessment. The punishment seemed excessive for what appeared to be an innocent conversation initiated by Princess Charlotte herself. "Sir Geoffrey," Prince William said, "I'd like you to arrange a meeting with Captain Morrison and Mrs. Hartwell. I believe we need to review this decision." Sir Geoffrey felt a flutter of concern. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. May I ask what has prompted your interest in this particular case?" Prince William smiled slightly. "Let's just say that I've received some compelling testimony from a very credible witness about the character of Guard Mitchell and the circumstances of this incident." Meanwhile, Charlotte waited anxiously for news about Mr. Mitchell's fate, unaware that her determination to seek justice had set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately challenge the rigid protocols that governed palace life. Her simple act of caring about a guard's new baby had evolved into something much larger, a test of whether compassion could coexist with royal duty. The meeting convened in Prince William's private office the following afternoon, brought together all the key players in what had become known quietly among palace staff as the Mitchell affair. Sir Geoffrey Pemberton sat stiffly in his chair. Mrs. Hartwell perched nervously on the edge of hers, and Captain Morrison maintained his military bearing despite the obvious tension in the room. Prince William entered with the measured confidence that came from years of royal duty, but those who knew him well could detect an underlying intensity that suggested this was more than a routine administrative review. "Thank you all for coming," Prince William began, settling behind his desk. "I've asked you here because I believe we need to reconsider the disciplinary action taken against Guard Mitchell." Mrs. Hartwell's face immediately flushed with indignation. "Your Royal Highness, if I may, the guard clearly violated established protocol by engaging in inappropriate personal conversation with Princess Charlotte." Prince William held up a hand to stop her. "Mrs. Hartwell, I understand you are following what you believe to be proper procedure. However, I've reviewed the circumstances of this incident and I believe the response has been disproportionate." Captain Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Sir, palace security protocols exist for important reasons. If we make exceptions for one guard, it could set a dangerous precedent." "Captain Morrison," Prince William replied, his voice carrying quiet authority, "I'm not suggesting we abandon security protocols. I'm questioning whether a conversation about a new baby constitutes a genuine security breach or protocol violation worthy of reassignment." Sir Geoffrey cleared his throat nervously. "Your Royal Highness, perhaps we could find a middle ground. Guard Mitchell could receive a formal reprimand and additional training on appropriate boundaries." Prince William leaned back in his chair, considering the suggestion. Before we discuss solutions, I want you all to understand something important. Princess Charlotte came to me directly about this situation. She was deeply troubled by what she perceived as an injustice. The room fell silent. The idea that a 10-year-old princess had formally advocated for a palace guard was unprecedented in the experience of everyone present. Mrs. Hartwell found her voice first. Your Royal Highness, while I appreciate Princess Charlotte's compassion, she is still a child. She cannot fully understand the complexities of palace security and protocol. Prince William's expression grew stern. Mrs. Hartwell, my daughter may be 10 years old, but she possesses remarkable judgment about people and situations. She correctly identified that Guard Mitchell is a dedicated employee who was being punished for responding kindly to her questions. Captain Morrison attempted to interject. Sir, with respect, if we allow personal relationships between royals and staff— Captain, Prince William interrupted. There's a significant difference between inappropriate personal relationships and basic human kindness. Guard Mitchell didn't seek out personal conversation with my daughter. He responded politely to her questions about his well-being, exactly as any decent person would do. Sir Geoffrey sensed the direction of the conversation and tried to find a diplomatic solution. Perhaps we could implement clearer guidelines about appropriate responses to personal questions from young royals? Prince William nodded thoughtfully. That's a constructive suggestion, Sir Geoffrey. But first I want to address the immediate injustice. Guard Mitchell's reassignment will be reversed, effective immediately. Mrs. Hartwell's mouth opened in protest, but Prince William continued before she could speak. Furthermore, I want it clearly understood throughout this household that kindness, respect, and basic human decency are not violations of protocol. They are expressions of the values this family represents. At that moment, there was a soft knock on the office door. Prince William's secretary entered quietly. Your Royal Highness, I apologize for the interruption, but Princess Charlotte is requesting to speak with you. She says it's urgent and concerns the meeting you're currently having. Prince William exchanged glances with the others in the room. Please ask her to wait in the library. I'll speak with her shortly. But before the secretary could respond, Charlotte appeared in the doorway, her young face set with determination that surprised everyone present. Papa, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I heard that you were meeting about Mr. Mitchell, and I have something important to say. Mrs. Hartwell looked mortified. Princess Charlotte, this is highly inappropriate. You cannot simply— Mrs. Hartwell, Charlotte said, turning to face her governess with a composure that belied her years. I think it's inappropriate that a good man might lose his job because you don't think palace workers should be treated like human beings. The room fell into stunned silence. Captain Morrison's eyes widened, Sir Geoffrey's jaw dropped, and Mrs. Hartwell appeared too shocked to respond. Prince William felt a complicated mixture of pride and concern as he watched his daughter stand her ground against three formidable adults. Charlotte, what did you want to say about Guard Mitchell? Charlotte moved to stand beside her father's desk, her posture straight and confident. I want everyone to know that Mr. Mitchell didn't do anything wrong. I asked him if he was feeling well because he looked tired. I asked about his family because I care about the people who protect us every day. If anyone should be in trouble, it should be me for asking the questions, not him for being kind enough to answer them. Mrs. Hartwell finally found her voice. Your Royal Highness, you don't understand the importance of maintaining proper boundaries. I understand perfectly, Charlotte replied, her voice growing stronger. I understand that Mr. Mitchell has a new baby daughter named Emma. I understand that he works long hours to protect our family. I understand that he's never been in trouble before, and I understand that punishing him for being kind to me is wrong. Prince William looked around the room at the faces of his staff, seeing his daughter's moral clarity reflected in their expressions. Even Mrs. Hartwell seemed shaken by Charlotte's passionate defense. Charlotte, Prince William said gently, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Your defense of Guard Mitchell demonstrates exactly the kind of character I hope you'll always maintain. Charlotte nodded solemnly, then looked directly at each adult in the room. Mr. Mitchell is a good man who deserves to keep his job. If our rules say that being kind is wrong, then our rules need to change. The 10-year-old princess had just delivered a lesson in justice and leadership that none of the adults in the room would ever forget. The impact of Princess Charlotte's passionate defense reverberated through Kensington Palace for the remainder of that day and well into the evening. Word of the 10-year-old princess standing up to senior staff members spread quietly among the palace workers, creating a buzz of admiration and hope that had been absent for years. Thomas Mitchell was in his small office, clearing out his personal belongings and preparing for his reassignment to external perimeter duty, when Captain Morrison appeared in his doorway. The captain's expression was unreadable, and Thomas braced himself for additional bad news. "Mitchell," Captain Morrison said, his voice softer than usual. "Please report to my office immediately. Leave your belongings here." Thomas's heart sank. He assumed he was about to face additional disciplinary action or perhaps immediate termination. As he walked through the corridors toward the security office, he noticed several staff members giving him sympathetic looks, which only increased his anxiety. When Thomas entered Captain Morrison's office, he was surprised to find the captain standing rather than sitting behind his desk, and his expression showed something Thomas had never seen before, what appeared to be embarrassment. "Mitchell," Captain Morrison began, his military bearing intact but his tone notably different. "I've just come from a meeting with Prince William regarding your situation." Thomas remained at attention, unsure how to interpret this development. Captain Morrison continued, "It appears that your case has been reviewed at the highest levels, and the decision regarding your reassignment has been reversed. You will return to your regular duties effective immediately." Thomas felt as though the floor had shifted beneath his feet. "Sir, I don't understand. Has something changed about the incident?" "What's changed," Captain Morrison said, meeting Thomas's eyes directly, "is that Princess Charlotte herself intervened on your behalf. She provided a compelling defense of your character and made it clear that she initiated the personal conversation you've been disciplined for." Thomas struggled to process this information. The idea that a 10-year-old princess had personally advocated for his job seemed impossible. Yet Captain Morrison's serious expression suggested it was entirely true. "Sir, I'm not sure what to say," Thomas managed. Captain Morrison walked around his desk and extended his hand to Thomas. "What you should say is that you'll continue to serve this family with the same dedication and integrity you've shown for the past 3 years. "And Mitchell?" "Yes, sir. In the future, when young royals ask about your well-being, feel free to respond with appropriate kindness. We've been reminded today that human decency is not incompatible with royal protocol." Meanwhile, Princess Charlotte was experiencing her own emotional aftermath from the confrontation. After leaving her father's office, she had gone directly to her room, where the magnitude of what she had done began to sink in. She had challenged adult authority figures, defended a palace worker, and essentially forced a change in established policy. Her mother, the Duchess of Cambridge, found her sitting quietly by her bedroom window, looking out at the palace grounds. "Charlotte, your father told me what happened today," her mother said, sitting on the bed beside her daughter. "I want you to know how proud I am of you for standing up for what you believed was right." Charlotte turned to face her mother, her young eyes showing the weight of responsibility she was beginning to understand. "Mama, was I wrong to speak to those adults that way?" Mrs. Hartwell looked very upset. The Duchess chose her words carefully. "Charlotte, there will be times in your life when you'll need to choose between following rules and doing what's right. Today you chose to defend someone who couldn't defend himself, and that took tremendous courage." "But what if I made things worse for Mr. Mitchell?" Charlotte asked, voicing her deepest fear. Her mother smiled warmly. "Sweetheart, you didn't make things worse. You made them better. Sometimes it takes someone with a clear view of what's fair to help adults see when they've made a mistake." The next morning brought a return to normal routines, but with subtle changes that reflected the previous day's events. When Charlotte took her morning walk with Mrs. Hartwell, the governess's demeanor was noticeably different. She seemed less rigid, more thoughtful, and occasionally glanced at Charlotte with what appeared to be newfound respect. As they approached the main entrance, Charlotte's heart lifted when she saw Thomas Mitchell back at his usual post. He stood at attention in his perfectly pressed uniform, but when he saw Charlotte approaching, his professional expression softened into a genuine smile. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Thomas said with his customary politeness, but his voice carried unmistakable warmth and gratitude. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," Charlotte replied, stopping directly in front of him. "How is baby Emma today?" Mrs. Hartwell tensed slightly but remained silent as Thomas's face lit up with paternal pride. "She's doing very well, thank you for asking, Your Highness," She slept for 4 hours straight last night, which felt like a miracle to my wife and me. Charlotte laughed delightedly. That's wonderful. Please tell your wife that I hope Emma continues to sleep well. I certainly will, Your Highness. Thank you for your kindness. As they continued their walk, Mrs. Hartwell spoke quietly to Charlotte. Your Royal Highness, I owe you an apology. Yesterday taught me that caring about people is not a weakness or a protocol violation. It's one of the qualities that will make you an exceptional leader. Charlotte looked up at her governess with surprise and growing understanding. Mrs. Hartwell, I think we both learned something important yesterday. That afternoon, Prince William found his daughter in the garden, reading under her favorite oak tree. He sat beside her on the grass, something that would have horrified protocol experts just days earlier. Charlotte, I wanted to talk to you about what happened yesterday, he said. Charlotte marked her place in her book and gave her father her full attention. You demonstrated something remarkable, Prince William continued. You showed that true leadership isn't about following rules blindly, but about understanding when those rules serve people and when they need to be challenged. Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. Papa, will I have to make decisions like this when I'm older? Yes, sweetheart, you will. And yesterday proved that you have the wisdom and courage to make the right choices, even when they're difficult. As father and daughter sat together in the peaceful garden, both understood that something fundamental had changed in the palace. A 10-year-old princess had reminded everyone that kindness and protocol could coexist, that justice mattered more than rigid rules, and that sometimes the youngest voice in the room could speak the greatest truth. Guard Thomas Mitchell continued his dedicated service to the royal family, secure in his position and grateful for the unexpected advocate who had changed not just his life, but the very culture of the palace he proudly served. And Princess Charlotte carried forward the knowledge that standing up for others, regardless of their position or status, was not just the right thing to do. It was the royal thing to do.